Today basically I will present my work. It will be a presentation full of images, and one point you have to memorize is that it's about data visualization. So this kind of transformation of information from tabular form, if you want, from database, from JSON, XML, all these kind of formats in visuals, okay, in images and so on. So the title of this presentation is Communication Through Space, the mapping of science as a medium. And the reason for this title is that I can define myself as a designer, and it's pretty rare to have designers working within academia, but it's interesting because my approach to data visualization is not limited to the screen. I have a PhD in architecture from the Polytechnical School of Lausanne, and this is the reason because I want often I like to create public installation and use the space to present data. So I started with the presentation just with a few examples of data visualization. Let's say that data visualization is a very broad term and very recent. We have visualizations even from Middle Ages, and basically it's a form of conveying information through visuals. But today we have many types of them, and I just run a Google search to present you which kind of data visualization can you find in newspapers, on websites and so on. So we have, for example, charts, which is very simple. We have bar charts that are very common. We have pie charts, and this is the standard visualization you can get with Microsoft Office. We have diagrams that imply a kind of reasoning, a kind of mechanical visualization of a system, and they are usually used for present a system, a mechanism, and they want to understand something that is more complex. Then you have infographics, and here we are between data visualization and visual communication. We have a lot of graphics design. Usually you create this with computational tools, but then you can import PDF images in Illustrator, and you have a kind of post-production, and you create a poster, you can create websites and so on. And you have maps. Of course, maps are elder than data visualization, but it's interesting to think about maps as a specific form of data visualization. And then we have visualization. All these examples are results from Google, so you just can type your search and you get these images. And if you type data visualization, you have a kind of a dashboards. It's not my cup of tea, but it's interesting to see that Google memorized visualization as dashboards, which is basically a collection of different data visualization on the same subject to have a larger view of the problem, of the subject.
Da qua non si possono regolare le luci per spegnere solo queste sopra. Aspetta. Provo con questo?
Okay.
Meglio.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So I was saying that visualization is quite a messy definition, at least the one of Google, because you have a bunch of stuff. But when we type, when we search for data visualization, we have a kind of a complexity emerging in these images, and we have the computational side, because we can create them with coding, but even using tools on the web. So basically copy and paste data and get the results and so on. I had the pleasure to meet Manuel Lima. And Manuel Lima is it's a very famous designer working for Google, but he's an expert of data visualization. And he published 3 books that I suggest just to look at them because they are just beautiful. The first one is called Visual Complexity, Mapping Patterns of Information. And this is very related to networks. And network is a very specific type of data visualization I will show you later, because most of my work is created by networks. But what is interesting is that then Manuel started to dig in the past and showing that we have a visualization even from the Middle Ages, which is very interesting. And he's trying to connect present visualization with the visualization of the past. And then the connection with Manuel is that he wrote for my book a very nice blurb. So I had the pleasure to publish my PhD thesis, basically. So in part it's a little bit annoying, but you can find some nice stuff in it. And we publish it in French and in English, and the good news is that the English version is available for free. So you have a link, you have just to download the publication and then join it. You will see the content of this presentation is included in my book. I think more or less 90%, and it's very visual. Yeah. So in July I had the pleasure to interview Manuel Lima, and we had this beautiful conversation about data visualization, about the way in which he started to work on these objects, which are quite recent, at least the computational ones. And this is a very nice diagram to introduce you to disclose what is the composition, how we can create data visualization. What you can see in this diagram, in this case, is that the visualization is created in different steps, and especially the square indicates the 4 steps for the visualization. So we have data, we have information, we have knowledge, and we have wisdom. I don't talk about wisdom because it's more a philosophical subject, but it's interesting that these 3 steps, data, information, knowledge, are 3 different phases in which data visualization is, let's say, the core. So we have that data, we need the data to create data visualization, but the relation between data and information is the creation of the visualization. So if we think about the designer as the person in charge of doing this translation, it's working at this stage. So basically, it's data visualization is a translation from data to information. And information is something already prepared by the designer for the public. And the public enters in the last step for me, which is the knowledge. So in the part of knowledge, and this is very important for you, especially your students that are working in communication, because I think that a lot of designers are not thinking about the audience, but the audience, the reading of the visualization is the final step to create knowledge among the readers. So the point is that we have these 3 steps, and we have the designer creating the data visualization, and then we have the reader that has to interact with the data visualization. And at this point, with the reading, the action of a reading, a graph, a bar chart, we can create a knowledge. And this is quite important for Manuel Lima, because it's a kind of balancement between data visualization and interaction design. And this is interesting because a lot of designers that were doing interface design, UX design and so on, they started to do data visualization in the last years. So they are connected because you create the visualization, but then you have a part of a parameterization in which you can work with the data visualization and get insights from it. So this is another version, and this is some theoretical stuff that is interesting to start to talk about data visualization. And the reason in part is that I spent a few years in France. I will tell you why later. But Paul Hotelet is a kind of the father of the internet for them, because basically at the beginning of the 20th century he created, he thought about the internet from the libraries. So he thought this passage, kind of imagining a worldwide library accessible to everyone. But in this case, he created this pretty nice infographic, if you want, in which we have the two parts of the data visualization. We have the creation, so we have the person looking at the world, or in this case looking at the society, and try to report observation about the society, in this case in a book. And this is the left part. On the right you see the part of the reading. So we have a person looking for an object in a museum or a book in a library, and so in that part you have the part of interpretation. So when you have a think in general of the media, but especially in data visualization, you have the part of the creation and you have the part of consuming the data visualization. So I think you can know the work of Bruno Latour. Bruno Latour is a very famous sociologist with whom I had the pleasure to work a couple of years in 2011, 2020 and 2012, and he's pretty interesting working with him, especially in this project. Basically was his ERC project, which is a kind of grant of 1.5 billion. I was in Paris, I was in the metaLAB of a Science Po, and I helped him to create this digital book with some colleagues and friends, namely Donato Ricci and Daniele Guido. And so we created this book, which is kind of sum of his entire scientific production. And what was interesting is that the book was provided by Harvard University Press without any index, and all the indexes, all the dictionary, all this kind of stuff was in the digital version, which is published on the internet for free. And so I started to work with him as a designer, as an interface designer. I was coding in JavaScript, I was coding in CSS. We created this beautiful work that is still available if you wanted to check it. And basically the idea is that you have two columns, one column with the text and the other column with the references. And so you can look at the references without lose the relation with the text. But of course, the influence of Latour on my work, I think, is visible. And one of the reasons why Bruno is so famous in sociology is the creation of actor-network theory with Michel Callon, and it's inspired, if you want, to the work of Leviathan, of Hobbes. So basically, maybe Massimiliano is better than me, but he was interested in the structure, and Latour was fascinated, but this image which was the cover of the book published in the 17th century, that all the people are creating destruction which is embodied by the king. You have this kind of a reification of the citizen in this larger figure. But we have, of course, this kind of approach even for organization. So, for example, we talk about the CERN of Geneva, and the CERN is composed by 10,000 of people working together. So CERN is just a term to indicate all this group of scientists working on the site. And at the same time, so we have this actor-nectar theory, which is a theoretical framework of sociology, and at the same point in the history we got this explosion of network visualization. So network visualization is a very specific kind of data visualization in which you have elements which are connected according to a specific metric you can use. And so basically, when I was there was Bruno Latour thinking about this kind of a theory, and we were trying to match how the techniques of that moment could match to the theory of sociology. It's, yeah, I think it's good as an explication. And then everything was situated in Paris, in Sciences Po University, which is the University of Political Sciences, in the very center of Paris. And what was this experiment, in terms of the lab, was to put together engineers and sociologists to create a new domain of research that is called computational sociology, if you want. But the great intuition of Bruno Latour was the idea to add designers, to melt the work of sociologists and engineers together. So basically I was in that part of designers, and I was employed to create interface, to create a visualization. But finally the output of this lab was really interdisciplinary between these three domains. So sociology, engineering, and design. And then after the experience in France, I got the opportunity to move to Lausanne in Switzerland, where I got my PhD in architecture and sociology of the city. And this photograph is about the transition of my career. So I'm there with Bruno Latour in this Harry Potter style, and then there is Frédéric Kaplan in the middle, who's a kind of chair of digital humanities at EPFL. EPFL it's the Polytechnical School of Lausanne. It's the second one, it's the sister of the Zurich one, ETH. And I had the pleasure to start working with them, especially for this conference in digital humanities, in which we presented this carpet in which everything was connected, but just remember the red of the carpet. So what is the topic of my doctoral studies? It's the representation. So specifically, it's the representation of scientific communities that can go under the umbrella of the mapping of science. So in this slide you have a photograph, because the photograph is a kind of a representation of a scientist. But of course you have this beautiful book authored by Roland Barthes, and it's called Camera Lucida in English, and otherwise is Chambre Claire in French. And it's a very nice book, very easy to read, and he destructured the media of the photography inserting these three elements, these three actors, if you want to use the Latour's dictionary. So we have the operator shooting with the camera, we have the spectrum, which is the subject of the photography, and then we have the spectator, who is consuming the photo. So we have this three stages. Before I was introducing to you the designer, the reader, but then we have the object of the creation, the object of interaction. And I think that Bart created just a beautiful introduction to these three actors. So I started my inquiry from a visual point of view, thinking about how a community can be represented. In this case, we have Jon Snow, which is not the one of Game of Thrones, but we are in the 19th century, and this is the Soho neighborhood in London. And basically, he was able to find the source of cholera cases in the neighborhood, just tracing this map. So he went to ring the door to all the neighborhood, and he counted the number of deaths in each building. And basically, they visually represented this. I mean, he had the clues about the reason, the source of cholera, that basically was a water pump in the very center of the neighborhood. But he needed the proofs to stop this pump, to act with the measure, and to ask to stop it. So basically, he created this map just to support his thesis. So we have people represented, and we have an usage of this visualization. This is another one, very nice. It's always we are in the mid of the 19th century, and this is Daniel McCallum, who was an engineering, and this is the train riots in the northeast side of America. You have New York and many cities connected, but basically he was using this kind of visualization to reorganize people around the different spaces. So in this case, data visualization is a kind of tool for managers, for reorganization, to have this whole view that belongs to geography too. And this is a beautiful piece, even of art if you want. On the right you see detail of such a data visualization. And then we have William Brighton, who is another engineering, and from the US, I think, yes. And basically he created an analysis of organizational charts, and you have radial charts, but the most common one is this inverted tree, where you have the boss on the top, and then you have directors, and then you have employees. And what is interesting for me, I spent 4 years working for the European Commission in Ispra, vicino a Varese, and that these are two different organizational charts. One is from 50s, and the other one was I think 10 years ago. And what is astonishing is that in 50 years, in 80 years, in 1 century, the language is always the same, which is kind of crazy. So I wanted to work in this on this specific problem. And I started my inquiry with the networks. Probably you know Giacomo Moreno, but Giacomo Moreno in 1930s, he introduced the shape of a network we know, just to visually encode his data that are about friendship. So for example, this sociogram is a connection between children at school, who is friend of whom. And so we have elements, we have a connection, and with the time things became more complex. We have Michael Lombardi, who was a great artist, You can find his work at the MoMA in New York and in many museums. And he started to use networks to organize his information about a specific topic. I think this one is something related to Bill Clinton and some strange connection with Taiwan. And then we arrive to Bruno Latour, we arrive to the metaLAB of Sciences Po. We have this beautiful tool which is still working called Gephi. And basically it's a kind of a transition from the Excel file, at least the relational information you can have in an Excel file, and you can start working. But of course you see limits because you have so many connections that it's difficult to read. So I wanted to find something new to make information consumable, accessible to everyone. So this is the project of my thesis, and it's a cartographic project about the Polytechnical School of Lausanne, EPFL. If you are passionate about architecture, you can notice this building full of halls, and this is the library, which is beautiful. It was presented 10 years ago at Venice Biennale of Architecture. And this is basically the campus. So how we can represent the people working there? So I created this data visualization, which is very complex. I just offer to you an introduction on this. And we have labs, and what you see here is different labs from many departments. In red we have labs of architecture, in green we have labs of environmental engineering, and in blue civil engineering. So the idea was to represent this faculty of EPFL, which is on the building from these three different perspectives, and I started to draw the labs to see how is the proximity between them. And this is a zoom on a specific part of the map, in which we started to see the names of the labs, but even we noticed that all the nodes have the same thickness, and through the thickness I can show the practice of each lab. I can zoom in, and you can see this complex object. And I mean, it's a long history, but I think it's time for a demo. And so basically I just wanted to put together individuals and the structure of individuals that basically is based on labs. I will try to run the demo. Okay. You can see the screen, so just move. This is the application. So it was a thesis, but it was even a project that I developed with my directors, Federico Kaplan, Boris Bod, and a couple of developers, Pierpaolo Follia and Eugène. Okay, okay. And basically, it's a little bit far. You have all the labs. You can select one of them and you can zoom in. Archivum, it's the gallery of the ENAC, so it's a little bit strange. But basically what you can do is to visit a specific part of the network and see which are the laboratories that are close. Okay, this is a kind of a critique of the citation metric that we have in academia. A lot of relational connection are explicitated by referencing other authors. And here I tried to develop a concept which is based on the affinity. So I put together labs that are working together by advising, by teaching, which is very important that it's not considered by citation analysis, and of course even papers. Yeah. So this is my thesis project. Maybe if you have a question, you can talk about this later. But conclusions of my thesis are this. We found it very enriching to represent the nodes with people. So in the first stage we were showing just labs, but individuals are more interesting than labs. So we started to use personal information. But by using personal information was difficult. So we created a sort of design in which it was impossible to compare different individuals, and this is very important because evaluation can be very stressful for you students, but it's also stressful for the teachers. And then we even apply a gravitational force to create a sense of a community, because you can have relational data, but often you have labs that are not connected. So we applied this gravity force to have all in one. And of course, support openness and inclusion, especially when you disclose the visualization to the public. I have a few examples, but I think we have still 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
Yeah. So this is a very beautiful video of Charles and Ray Eames that I invite you to look on the internet. It's available on YouTube, and basically it's based on the logic of the zoom, which is very used in my projects. So basically the idea in general, like the affinity map, is that you have different levels of information at a different level of details, and by zooming you can see more information. So zooming, it's a kind of action that is demanded to the readers to interact with the visuals. Harry Beck, very famous, he drew the map of London during the 30s, and the output was so strong that the same basically the same visual method was used all over the world in all the undergrounds. So you see on the left the old one that basically is based on the territory, and the second one, which is kind of a simplification by geometrical forms, and we experienced that the second one is more readable. And this is one of the concepts implemented in the map, along with hexagon, which is kind of optimization of spaces. In this example, you have hexagon used for urban studies, how we can create cities. And of course, Portland charts. Portland charts are where the map of the Middle Ages to travel between the cities. And this is a beautiful map in which lines are connections between cities, and if you pay attention on the top right, you can see the shape of Italy, and then you see all the Mediterranean. And the contours are given by the name of the cities. You don't have a line. Okay, other visualization. Here we are in the 18th century, and this is a visualization of plants, and I think this is the first visualization in which we leave the shape of a tree, which is very common in the Middle Ages, to use this kind of a spatial representation in which the position is proximity, affinity, and so on. So we use the space in a different way, and there is no direction to read this. The only metric you have in this kind of a visualization is the distance between the objects. And here, some technical stuff is dimensionality reduction that I will show you later in a project. And here, very interesting, Pierre Bourdieu. He's a famous French sociologist, and basically he used dimensionality reduction to summarize interviews. And what is nice in the approach of Pierre Bourdieu is that you have this kind of maps with people, you have this kind of maps with interests, and he was drawing on the map, just finding groups, finding clusters, finding. It was a kind of representing on the data visualization the insights he was able to get from the visualization. So, we are running quite close to the end. I like to tell these stories about Winston Churchill. When he was very close to retirement, they gifted him with a portrait created by Graham Sutherland, and he was not happy with that. The history tells us that the portrait was burned down in his house, and we don't have traces of it except a small sketch in the portrait gallery in London. But what's interesting from this story is that when you present data connected to organization, it's very simple to show them. But when you start to present people, it's very difficult. And you can have sensitive data, and you have to pay a lot of attention to present personal data. This is the carpet you have seen before. So basically, I started to explore spaces during my doctoral studies, creating this carpet, in which the name of conference speakers were shown as a network, but what was very interesting for me was the interaction of them with this carpet. So it was 2014, if you go still on Twitter, you can retrieve many images from them, and this is Brian Proxel. And he wanted a portrait with this, but you have many things. So basically, I discovered this very interesting relation between the reader and his digital image, represented through a visualization. And I wanted to work on this, especially with science. This is the way in which I present the affinity map to the scientific community of APFL. I created this huge visualization with the labs, of course, but even people were invited to find themselves by working on the visualization. It was just a fun way to present the outcome of the project to the community. And then, like Freitag, we even decided to create bags from the visualization, and we gifted the colleagues of the faculty for Christmas with these bags. The only problem was that there was no bags for each of them, and the bags carried different names, so sometimes they fight to have their own, the bag with their own name. So personal design is something to think about. I created this with my friend Alberto Romele, which is basically the cycle of design. And so in a few words, this diagram shows you that if we have a cycle for objects, so during the centuries, objects are getting better and better just because we improve techniques. We can think about this even in terms of the reader. So we study, we talk with people, and we improve ourselves. So I think that data visualization is a kind of object we can use for self-improvement. And I just finished the presentation with a few projects I'm working on right now. This is the conference mapping, which is based on the lexical distance between conference speakers. and you have this map, you have keywords, you have word clouds, and basically what you can do in this kind of a visualization is to zoom in a specific area, and this is, for example, autonomous vehicles, and then you discover people. So again, there is this work of zoom, you have a cluster, you have words, you can zoom in it and discover the identity of people. Same I created for the COVID-19, so I know that you read the paper of it. It's the same approach. I tried to show all the people working on COVID, but the data set was huge. So we created this kind of zooming even to summarize the visualization. I think there is a very short video in which you can zoom in a specific area, and words leave the place to speakers, to authors, to scientists. So it's another way of mapping the science. But the data set, and this is the last project, was very interesting because it was challenging in terms of technology, because the collection in June 2021 was about 600,000 più di mezzo milione of articles just published in 1 year and a half about the COVID, and this is just crazy. And I leave this one, but I go to this one. So I just presented 2 weeks ago at Ars Electronica, which is a very famous festival of internet art based in Austria, closer to Vienna, in Linz. And with that technology, they have a Unity, which is a technology for video games. We were able to show all these articles. So not people in this case, but articles, because we wanted to show the massive amount of articles produced during the pandemic and still being produced. And what is interesting is that Unity is a 3D environment. So in the web we have a very limited use of a 3D, but in this case we created a timeline. So from the front is a network, from the side it's a timeline, and you can see all the articles are just in 2020, 2021. But we still have a few articles from the past because we had the SARS, and the SARS was an infection from coronavirus family. And this is just a short video we created during the presentation, and there is this huge theater which is called Deep Space 8K, and we have a 16-meter screen, beautiful, so I was talking in front of the public and presenting this visualization. I usually refer to this line as the Milky Way, but basically it's just a cluster of articles published, in this case in 2020. Okay. So my presentation is finished. You can have all the information on my website. I want just to say that all my research is public and it's shared. Even the code of my visualization is open access, so you can explore it if you are interested in it. And don't hesitate to write to me if you have a question, but potete fare delle domande anche adesso. Grazie.